Today I want to talk about if statements and logical operators. The purpose of if statements and logical operators would say that we often ask yes or no questions and we decide what to do based on whatever the answer is. And these sort of questions are called conditions. And if we combine these conditions and responses together, we create if statements. So an if statement is made up of the if keyword, followed by a condition and a colon. And the lines following the colon must be in a block. It's important that they're in a block. And if the answer to the question is true, then the commands in the block are going to run. So why don't we look at a sample of what it's going to be, of what it's going to look like. So if we think about this conditional, and if we set a variable, we write the conditional like this. We begin with the if keyword, followed by the condition. So if I say if the age is less than 18, then the colon. And notice that in my programming interface, it automatically enters a tab for me. If it doesn't for you, you've got to make sure you tab over. So if I say if the age is less than 18, we might say something like print, you should be in school. If I save this and I run it, we have the output. You should be in school. So we have our variable. And then right here, age is less than 18, we have this condition. Is this condition true? Yes. Then we run it. Okay? So what I want to talk a little bit about now is Whitespace. And what Whitespace is like the tab that you just created. That's a space that we created. And that space is meaningful. So code that is in the same position is grouped into a block, and whenever you start a new line with more spaces than the previous one, you're starting a new block, and that's part of the previous code. So let's go back and look at my screen. So right here, this is a block. This is a complete block, okay? If I continue and keep saying things like, you should be in school, go to class, study hard, whatever. All of this is a block. The minute I leave it, and I write something else like an else statement, well, this is another block. You understand? This is one block, and this is the other. So why don't we erase that for right now? So one thing you have to also understand is that code blocks must have the same amount of spaces. So if in code block 1 you have 4 spaces, then you have to keep that same consistency throughout your entire code, like 4 spaces for block 1, maybe 8 spaces for block 2. But the easiest way to do this is just to use the tab key, right? If you hit tab, it's going to be about the same amount of spaces if you hit tab twice. You understand? So I like using tab to work through my spaces. And it probably would be easy for you as well to just use that tab key too. So why don't we build a sample to show you how this works? Why don't we build a simple conditional statement to say that if their name is Fred, then we'll say hi Fred, and if it's not Fred, then we'll say you're not Fred. So why don't we build this conditional out? Well, first have to get a variable for their name, so we'll have an input. And then we'll say, here's your name. And if we want to keep it constant, then maybe we should lowercase their entire input altogether. Like, who cares if they do a capital letter in their first name? We should just take that out. So if you remember from our last class, we'll say dot lower. And why don't we remove any spaces out? Let's do that. To the left or to the right. And then we're going to do this conditional statement. So if the name is equal, notice the use of double equals. A single equal is an assignment. A double equal is a comparison. Okay? So I'm comparing two things. I want to use double equal. So if name is equal to Fred, Notice it's all lowercase because that's the output we want. Then we'll say print, hello, Fred. All right. But why don't we do an else? An else statement requires nothing else. An else statement is basically just saying that for everything else not covered, this will be the outcome, right? So if it's not Fred, then it must be something else. So this is where we write this else statement. Else statements do not have conditionals. Else statements are just by themselves, okay? So let's take a look. So we say else, well, they're not Fred, so print you are not Fred. Save it. Let me clear my terminal out and let's run it. So then here we go. It says, what is your name? If I say Cam and I hit enter, you are not Fred. That's correct. Right, let's run it again. But this time I'm going to say I'm Fred. And I'll do uppercase F-R-E-D and I'll hit enter. Hello, Fred. So you see how this conditional works. It's comparing the inputs and then it gives me the output. So in this case that we've written, there's only two possible outcomes. You're Fred or you're not Fred. So we've written it as such. It's like a coin toss. It's either heads or it's tails. And I think in this case, we can start building out more things, right? We can start dropping in things like else if statements. And so else if statements are statements to say like, well, what if I'm looking for Fred or what if I'm looking for Dave? Why don't we do that? Let's go take a look. So then, if their name is Fred, we'll say hello, Fred. And we do an else if statement by saying elif. Elif stands for else if. Else if the name is equal to Dave. Notice the lowercase again. And we'll say print hello, Dave. And then finally in the else statement, we could just finally say, look, you are not Fred or Dave. Okay? So let's go ahead and cover those double equal signs again, and let's talk about these symbols that are operators that we use. So why don't we take a look at the screen and then we'll go over those. And right after we're done with that, we'll talk about the rules of and, not, and or. So if we're looking at this screen, let me erase all of this. And I think a lot of you already know this, right? We have an equal to, we have a not equal to, we have greater than, less than, we have greater than or equal to, and then we have less than or equal to. So why don't I just write these down in comments? So this is equal to, we have a not equal to, greater than, less than, oops, excuse me, less than, you're going to have greater than or equal to, and finally, and these are all things that you've probably already remember from basic math. These are, we want to apply conditions. And when we think about all of this stuff, it's either going to return true or false. And like I said, code is only going to run if the conditions are true. So the block of code will only run if the conditional is true. If the conditional is not true, if it's false, it won't run. It'll just skip and go to the next block. And you need to understand that, right? We talked about if, we talked about else if. So the purpose of an else if is to say that we're going to check to see an if statement. If the if statement is not true, if there's another condition we're going to check that under else if. And if that's not true, we can finally return the else. Now let's go ahead and introduce the random function. I think the random function is one of the most important functions is because we're going to generate a random number and we're going to use that number with our logical operator. So our goal for this particular coding exercise is we're going to generate a random number. I'll teach you how to do that. And then we're going to save that as the computer's choice. And then we're going to try to guess to see if we can guess what the computer has chosen. So why don't we look at the screen now and then we'll go over a couple of things together. Whenever we import a function, see, Python, you can, modules. Whenever we want to import a module in Python, we say import and followed by the name of the module. Now, Python has a ton of modules, but the one we're going to use now is called random. And whenever we import it, I'm going to give it a name that I can remember. So I'm going to import random as rand. And whenever we call on the random, we just say rand. And there's two main ones I want to show you. And the first is going to be random by itself. So let's just do that. I'm going to print rand dot random. And we'll see what kind of numbers we generate. So let me just kind of scroll this terminal up and then you can see. So I generate 0.92, all those numbers. I do it again and again and again. You'll notice that these numbers are never 1. It is because the random function returns a number between 0 and 1. It never returns 1. It goes up until 0.9999999, but it never returns 1. It goes from 0 to 0.99999. If you've taken the Arduino class with me, then you'll understand it's the same thing. If you're taking the JavaScript class with me, it's the same thing. So we want to simplify this random number by using another function called Randint. So let's take a look at that now. So let me clear this terminal window out. And let me print rand.randint. And then another set of parentheses. Now, randint is special because it needs parameters. So randint, you have to tell it, return a number between what and what. And both of these numbers are included. So if I say 1, comma 3, it's going to return 1, 2, or 3. Now this is actually pretty simple. So if I hit run, I get 1 right here. And this is the random number by itself. You can see how one would be cleaner than the other, especially if we're running a conditional statement later. I'm going to erase this. I'm going to erase this random part and just use the randint. So let's do it again. 1, I get 2 this time. I get 1 this time. I get 1 this time. I get 3 this time. So you can see that I've returned 1, 2, or 3 using the randint. So to clarify, randint means you have to specify the numbers that you want to call. So if I say 1, 3, it's going to return 1, 2, or 3. If I say 1, 100, it's going to return 1 all the way up to 100, which you can see might be easier than just calling the random number by itself. So why don't we start building this game? And let's walk it through together. So the first thing I'm going to do clear out this terminal. And we're going to have the computer make a choice. And we'll call it comp choice, and it's going to equal and rand.randint. And to make this game simple, why don't we say it calls a number between 1 through 10. All right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And after we do that, we now have to have the player make a choice. And as I type this out, tell me if you've already spotted the error or what needs to be cleared up. Did you figure it out yet? If you said int, good job. You need to make sure that the player's choice is an integer. Now, why don't we begin to do these conditionals? If, well, so let's think about it. if we're playing this game, and by the way, I think 1 through 10 is going to be really difficult. But if you have unlimited number of tries, then who cares? So let's try this out. If we're playing a number guessing game, what are the 3 main conditions? Right? There's 3. You're either going to win by guessing the number, you're going to be too high, or you're going to be too low. So why don't we modify our game, because I think 1 through 10 on a single try is going to be difficult to do. So why don't we just say 1 through 5? Okay, we'll shorten the number of choices. So Randint 1, 5, and then we'll tell the player we'll guess a number between 1 and 5. All right. Now, if the player's choice is less than the computer's choice, what are we going to say? Well, we can say print. You guessed too low. And then we'll print again and say the computer chose, and then followed by whatever the computer selected. So we've handled too low. Let's handle too high. Else if the player has guessed greater than the computer's choice, then we print again, you guessed too high, and then we just copy and paste this line because, well, it's easier. All right. By the way, notice my use of code blocks. That's a block here, and that's a block here. This belongs to the if. This belongs to the else if. So, as you might have guessed, what's next? Well, if we did if and we did else if we've handled too low and we've handled too high, then what's the next choice? Well, clearly, the person must have guessed properly. And as I said before, else statements require no conditional. So we would just now say print, you win. Triple exclamation. Did a good job. All right, let's hit save. And let's scroll this up. Let's hit run. Guess a number between 1 and 5. I'm going to guess 3. Oh, I won. Let's run it again. Guess a number between 1 and 5. I'll say 1. I guessed too low. The computer chose 3. All right. Yeah. So we have this working rudimentary game. Okay. So what have we done so far? Well, we have learned how to build a conditional using if-else statements, and I've taught you how the random function works using the randint. Now, why don't we practice the and statement, all right? So why don't I erase all of this again? And when would and work? Well, that's a good one. Let's say, so in our number guessing game, we're going to use an and statement to make sure the player has entered a number that is 1 or greater, or 5 or less. And how we're going to do that is by writing a good statement. So let's do this now. If the player has made a choice that is less than 6, or is less than or equal to 5, and the player has made a choice that is greater than or equal to 1, then we can run our game, okay? And inside of this, now we've already checked to make sure the player has done it correctly, and then we're going to say, fine, now we're going to check to see if you've won or not. If the player, yes, we can put an if statement inside another if statement. If the player is less than, or let's just make it simple for you. If the player is equal to comp choice, then we print you win. Else, we print you lose. computers, oops, you lose the computer selected and then a comp choice. All right, why don't we save this now, run it, and then we'll explain it together. So guess the number between 1 and 5. I choose 7. And then the game ends. So let's do this. We'll put a space here because I like it. And you've already seen where I kind of made a little error. We did an if statement here, right? We said if the player did it properly, we let them play. But we didn't say what would happen if the player didn't do it properly. So when we say else, and then we'll say print, you can't follow directions. All right, we scold them. Let's scold them for not being able to follow directions properly and play this game. So when we run this again, we're going to say if the condition is true, if the player has chosen numbers that are within our range, we're going to allow them to play. If they didn't, or they put in a letter or whatever the case, or a space, then we're going to tell them you can't follow directions. So let's run this game again. Let me clear my screen. Let's run this game. So asking me to choose a number between 1 and 5, I choose 9. Tells me you can't follow directions. I hit run. Choose a number between 1 and 5. I'll choose 4. Oh, I won. Let's run it again. Maybe that was a fluke. I'll choose 4 again. I lost. Computer selected 1. Okay. So in this particular case, we've learned how to use the if statements. We've learned else statements. We've learned else if statements. We've learned conditionals. We've learned logical operators. We've learned the random function. Super important. You're going to need that later. I think that just about covers this particular if statement and logical conditions lesson. If you have any questions, as usual, just email me at howard.cam@k12.us. Bye.